They thought she was weak. They thought she was nothing more than a gold digger who had failed to dig deep enough. When Audrey stood in that cold, grey lawyer's office and signed the divorce papers, she didn't scream, she didn't cry, and she didn't ask for a single penny of the Harrington fortune. Her mother-in-law laughed in her face. Her husband didn't even look up from his phone. They toasted to their victory, thinking the trash had finally taken itself out. But they were wrong. That signature wasn't a surrender. It was a detonation chord. And 6 months later, when the engines of a Gulfstream GX50 roared over their heads, they would finally realize they hadn't broken her. They had just set her free. The conference room at Sterling, Cooper & Davis smelled of lemon polish and old money. It was situated on the 45th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, offering a panoramic view of a city that felt increasingly cold to Audrey. She sat on one side of the mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple beige trench coat, one she had bought at a thrift store 3 years ago, and scuffed flats. Across from her sat the tribunal of her misery. Her husband, Daniel Harrington, his mother, Patricia Harrington, and their shark of a lawyer, Mr. Blackwood. "Let's make this quick," Patricia snapped, checking her diamond-encrusted Cartier watch. "Daniel has a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin at 1. We don't have time for theatrics, Audrey." Daniel didn't look at his wife. He was busy scrolling through his iPhone, likely texting her. Tiffany, the 22-year-old Instagram model he had been mentoring for the past 8 months, the same woman whose perfume had clung to his shirts for weeks. "Mr. Harrington has outlined the terms," Mr. Blackwood said, sliding a thick document across the table. His voice was oily, patronizing. "Since there was a prenuptial agreement, and considering the brevity of the union, only 2 years, the payout is minimal. However, out of the kindness of his heart, Mr. Harrington is offering a one-time settlement of $20,000. In exchange, you sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding the family business and the nature of the separation." $20,000. It was less than what Patricia spent on her monthly Botox injections. Audrey looked at the paper. For 2 years, she had been the maid, the cook, the punching bag for Patricia's verbal abuse, and the prop for Daniel's public image. She had nursed Daniel through his bout of pneumonia when everyone else was afraid of getting sick. She had organized the charity galas that got Patricia on the cover of Town and Country. "She should take it and run," Patricia sneered, leaning forward. "Honestly, Daniel, I told you she was a leech from the day you brought her home from that coffee shop. A barista. God, it's embarrassing." Daniel finally looked up, his eyes cold. "Just sign it, Audrey. Don't make this difficult. You know you can't afford a lawyer to fight us." Audrey reached into her bag. Patricia flinched, perhaps expecting a weapon, or maybe a desperate plea for more money. Instead, Audrey pulled out a cheap blue ballpoint pen. "I don't want the 20,000, Audrey said softly. The room went silent. "Excuse me?" Mr. Blackwood blinked, confused. "Mrs. Harrington, I strongly advise you to—" "I don't want his money," Audrey repeated, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I don't want the settlement. I don't want the apartment. I don't want the car." She flipped to the back page of the document. "What is she doing?" Patricia hissed. "Is this a trick? She wants more, Daniel. She's playing hard to get." "I just want out," Audrey said. She signed her name with a flourish. Audrey Harrington. For the very last time. She pushed the papers back across the table. "I've waived the alimony. I've waived the settlement. I've signed the NDA. I am leaving with exactly what I came in with. Nothing." Daniel frowned, a flicker of unease crossing his handsome, weak face. He was used to people fighting him for scraps. He was used to greed. He didn't understand dignity. "Why?" he asked, genuinely baffled. "You have nothing, Audrey. You're going to be homeless." "That's my problem, isn't it?" Audrey stood up. She felt lightheaded, but not from fear. It was the rush of oxygen returning to a drowning victim. "Well," Patricia huffed, snatching the papers to inspect the signature. "At least she has some sense. Good riddance. Make sure you leave your keys on the table, and don't expect a reference." Audrey placed the key fob to the penthouse on the glossy wood. It made a dull thud. "Goodbye, Daniel," she said. "Yeah, whatever," Daniel muttered, already typing a response to Tiffany. "Good luck flipping burgers." Audrey walked to the door. Her hand hovered over the brass handle. She turned back one last time. She didn't look angry. She didn't look sad. She looked amused. "Oh, and Patricia?" Audrey said. The older woman looked up, her lip curled. "What?" "Check the expiration dates on your caviar in the pantry. I think it turned bad 3 days ago." Before Patricia could scream, Audrey slipped out the door and closed it softly. As she walked down the long, plush corridor to the elevator, she didn't cry. She pressed the button for the lobby. When the doors opened, she stepped out onto the busy streets of Manhattan. It was raining, a cold, grey drizzle, but she didn't open an umbrella. She let the rain wash over her face. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old, cracked phone. She dialed a number she hadn't called in 3 years. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" A deep, gravelly voice answered. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms and silenced chaotic trading floors in London and Tokyo. "Uncle Sebastian," Audrey whispered, her voice finally breaking. "It's done. I'm free." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh of relief. "It's about time, kiddo. The jet is waiting at Teterboro. Come home." 6 months later. The Hamptons were buzzing. It was the first weekend of July, and the humidity hung thick over the manicured lawns and hedge-lined driveways of Southampton. This weekend wasn't just about the fireworks or the clam bakes. It was about the Harrington Summer Gala. For decades, the Harringtons had held the premier event of the season at their sprawling oceanfront estate, the Breakers. It was where deals were struck, marriages were arranged, and social statuses were solidified. But this year, the atmosphere was different. There was a scent of desperation under the perfume and champagne. Inside the master suite of the estate, Daniel was trying to tie his bow tie, his hands shaking slightly. "Stop fidgeting, babe," Tiffany whined from the bed. She was scrolling through TikTok, wearing a silk robe that had belonged to Audrey. "You're stressing me out." "I have to stress, Tiff," Daniel snapped. "The stock is down 40%. 40. Since the merger with Oakhaven fell through last month, investors are pulling out. If we don't secure the partnership with the European conglomerate tonight, the company goes under." "Whatever." Tiffany rolled her eyes. "You're a Harrington. You guys are too big to fail. Besides, look at this ring." She held up her hand, admiring the 3-carat yellow diamond Daniel had bought her, on credit, 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. "We look good, that's what matters." Daniel sighed. He missed Audrey's quiet competence. Audrey would have already fixed his tie. Audrey would have briefed him on the guests. Audrey would have made sure his mother wasn't drinking gin before noon. Speaking of his mother, Patricia burst into the room, looking frantic. She was wearing a red Valentino gown that was slightly too tight. "Daniel, the caterers are threatening to leave." "What?" "Why?" "Apparently the check bounced," she hissed, closing the door so the servants wouldn't hear. "You told me the account was replenished." "I thought it was." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "I moved funds from the offshore account. It should be there. Well, it isn't. I had to put the deposit on my personal Amex. This is humiliating, Daniel. If anyone finds out we're having liquidity issues, the sharks will circle. Patricia poured herself a glass of water, her hand trembling. Is he coming? The representative from the Phoenix Group? Yes, Daniel said, finally managing a crooked knot. Mr. Blackwood confirmed it. The Phoenix Group is our only hope. They're a private equity firm out of Zurich. Nobody knows who runs it, but they have billions in liquid assets. If they invest, we're saved. Good. Patricia smoothed her dress. We just need to charm him. Show him the Harrington legacy is strong. She glanced at Tiffany with distaste. And you? Try not to speak too much, dear. Just smile and look pretty. Tiffany stuck her tongue out as Patricia turned around, but she complied. By 7 p.m., the lawn was filled with the elite of New York. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne, and a string quartet played Mozart near the pool. But the gossip wasn't about the music. It was about the Harringtons. I heard Daniel had to sell the yacht, a banker whispered near the bar. And the ex-wife, where is she? Vanished. Someone said she's working at a diner in Jersey. Poor thing. Daniel stood at the entrance of the marquee tent, a pasted-on smile on his face, greeting guests. He felt sweat trickling down his back. Where was the Phoenix Group representative? Suddenly, a low rumble began to vibrate through the ground. It grew louder, drowning out the string quartet. Guests looked up, shielding their eyes against the setting sun. A massive helicopter, sleek and painted a midnight black, was descending from the sky. It wasn't a standard charter. It was military grade, repurposed for extreme luxury. The rotors whipped the carefully coiffed hair of the socialites into a frenzy. "Who on earth is that?" Patricia shrieked, holding onto her hat. "We didn't clear a landing." The helicopter touched down on the private helipad near the cliffs, kicking up a storm of dust. The side of the chopper bore a gold insignia, a rising phoenix encircled by a laurel wreath. "It's them," Daniel breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. "It's the Phoenix Group." The door of the helicopter slid open. Two large bodyguards in fitted suits stepped out first, scanning the crowd. Then a man stepped out, older, distinguished, with silver hair and a cane. "That's Sebastian Wolf," a guest gasped. "The shipping magnate? I thought he retired to a private island years ago." Daniel straightened his spine. Sebastian Wolf was a legend. If he was backing the Phoenix Group, they were golden. But Sebastian didn't walk toward the party immediately. He turned back to the helicopter and extended a hand. A woman stepped out. The crowd went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She was wearing a dress that looked like it was woven from starlight, a deep midnight blue silk that hugged every curve, with a slit that went up to her thigh. Her hair, once pulled back in a severe, sensible bun, now cascaded in loose, glossy waves down her back. She wore diamonds around her throat that made Tiffany's engagement ring look like a prize from a cereal box. She wore dark sunglasses, obscuring her eyes. She took Sebastian's hand and descended the steps with the grace of a queen. "Who is that?" Tiffany whispered, clutching Daniel's arm. "Is that a movie star?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. He knew that walk. He knew the tilt of that chin. The woman and Sebastian Wolf walked across the lawn, the crowd parting for them like the Red Sea. They stopped 10 feet away from where Daniel, Tiffany, and Patricia stood frozen. The woman reached up and slowly removed her sunglasses. Her eyes were piercing green. They locked onto Daniel's, cold and hard as emeralds. "Hello, Daniel," Audrey said, a small, terrifying smile playing on her red lips. "I hear you're looking for an investor." Patricia dropped her glass of champagne. It shattered on the stone patio, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the silence. "Audrey?" Patricia choked out. "But you're a barista." Audrey laughed, a sound that was rich and throaty, completely different from the timid mouse she had been 6 months ago. "Oh, Patricia," Audrey said, stepping closer, her heels clicking on the stone. "I was never just a barista. I was just undercover." She gestured to Sebastian. "I believe you know my uncle? Sebastian Wolf, the man who taught me everything I know about business and revenge." Audrey looked at the terrified faces of her ex-husband and his family. "Now," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried across the silent lawn, "shall we discuss the terms of your surrender? Or should I just buy the bank that holds your mortgage and foreclose on this house right now?" The silence on the lawn of the Breakers was absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster, the sucking back of the tide before the tsunami hits. Patricia Harrington was the first to move. Her face, usually a mask of composed arrogance, was fracturing. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock, struggling to reconcile the image of the woman in the midnight blue gown with the daughter-in-law she had treated like unpaid help for 2 years. "This is a joke," Patricia whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and terror. She looked at Daniel, then at the guests who were now blatantly staring, phones raised to capture the moment. "Daniel, get security. Tell them to remove these trespassers." "I wouldn't do that, Patricia," Sebastian Wolf rumbled. His voice was deep, carrying the weight of decades of iron-fisted business deals. He leaned heavily on his cane, which was topped with a silver wolf's head. "Unless, of course, you want the Phoenix Group to withdraw the offer regarding your liquidity crisis before we've even stepped inside." "I believe the bank forecloses on Tuesday." Daniel turned pale, the blood draining from his face so fast he looked like a wax figure. He took a step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Mr. Wolf," Daniel stammered, "please. My mother is distressed. We didn't know." He turned his eyes to Audrey. They were wide, searching, desperate. "Audrey, is it really you?" Audrey didn't look at him. She was looking past him, at the catering staff. She spotted Maria, the head housekeeper, who had been the only person in that house to show her kindness, sneaking her sandwiches when Patricia locked the kitchen at night. Audrey offered Maria a small, genuine smile and a nod. Maria covered her mouth with her hand, tears springing to her eyes. Then Audrey turned her gaze back to Tiffany. Tiffany was clutching her champagne glass so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at Audrey's dress, a custom couture piece that likely cost more than Tiffany's entire modeling contract, and then down at her own sequined outfit, which suddenly looked cheap and gaudy in comparison. "I like the ring, Tiffany," Audrey said, her voice smooth as velvet but cold as ice. 3 carats, princess cut. Daniel always did have predictable taste. It's VVS1 Clarity," Tiffany squeaked, trying to find her footing. "It's bought on a credit line with a 24% interest rate from Chase," Audrey corrected effortlessly. "I know. I bought the debt portfolio this morning." A ripple of gasps went through the crowd. "Shall we go inside?" Audrey suggested, though it wasn't a question. "It's getting a bit chilly out here, and I hate to see you sweating so much, Daniel. It ruins the silk of your jacket." She swept past them, leading the way into the house she had been kicked out of 6 months ago. The crowd parted instantly. As she walked, people who had previously ignored her or mocked her suddenly found their voices. "Audrey, darling, it's been so long," called out Mrs. van der Hoven, a socialite who had once spilled red wine on Audrey's shoes and demanded she clean it up. Audrey paused. She turned her head slightly, peering over the top of her sunglasses. "Mrs. Vanderhoven, I believe you still owe me an apology for that Merlot stain, and $50 for the dry cleaning." She didn't wait for an answer. She kept walking. Inside the grand foyer, the air conditioning was humming. The house looked the same. The marble floors, the crystal chandelier, the oversized portraits of Harrington ancestors. But the energy had shifted. It was no longer Daniel's castle. It was an arena, and the lions had just entered. Patricia came rushing in after them, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. "You can't just walk in here and take over. This is my house. I designed this interior." "Actually," Audrey said, running a finger along a dusty side table, inspecting the residue, "you hired a designer, and then you refused to pay him his final commission. He's currently suing you. I'm funding his legal team." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest. You vindictive little—" "Careful," Sebastian warned, stepping into the foyer behind Audrey. "You are speaking to the CEO of the Phoenix Group." Daniel froze. He had closed the front door to keep the prying eyes of the party guests out, but the reality of the situation was trapped in there with them. "CEO," Daniel whispered. "But, Audrey, you were a barista. I met you at the Daily Grind. You didn't know how to use a salad fork correctly at our first dinner. You were poor." Audrey turned slowly to face him. The playfulness was gone from her face, replaced by a profound, weary sadness that hardened into steel. "I was never poor, Daniel. I was estranged," she said. "I wanted to know what it felt like to be loved for me. Not for the Wolf name. Not for the billions my uncle controls. Not for the connections." She took a step closer to him. The scent of her perfume, jasmine and oud, expensive and intoxicating, filled his senses. It was a far cry from the vanilla body spray she used to wear because he told her it was sweet. "I walked away from my family legacy to find something real," she continued. "And when I met you, I thought I found it. I thought you loved the girl who made your coffee. I thought you loved the woman who listened to your dreams. But you didn't, did you?" Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. "You loved that I was manageable," Audrey said, her voice dropping lower. "You loved that I was grateful for the scraps you threw me. You loved that I made you feel big because I was small. And the moment you got bored, the moment a younger, shinier toy came along." She glanced at Tiffany, who was shrinking into the shadows near the staircase. "You threw me away like garbage." I didn't throw you away," Daniel tried to argue, his voice cracking. We grew apart." "You served me divorce papers on our anniversary, Daniel," Audrey stated flatly. "And you made me sign them in a room with your mother laughing at me." She turned to Sebastian. "Uncle, I'd like to use the library for the meeting. The lighting is better." "Of course, my dear," Sebastian said. "Wait!" Patricia shrieked. "You can't just go into the library. That's Daniel's private office." Audrey stopped at the double oak doors of the library. She placed her hand on the brass knob. "Patricia," she said, looking back over her shoulder. "As of 4:00 p.m. today, the Phoenix Group holds the controlling interest in Harrington Enterprises' debt, which means technically I own the desk he sits at, the chair he spins in, and the paper he signs his name on. I'm not asking for permission." She pushed the doors open. "Get inside," she commanded. "All of you. It's time to talk business." The library was dim, smelling of old leather and stale cigar smoke, a habit Daniel had picked up recently to look more executive. Audrey walked straight to the massive oak desk, the seat of power in the Harrington household. Daniel instinctively moved toward it, but Audrey got there first. She didn't sit in the guest chair. She walked around the desk and sat in Daniel's high-backed leather executive chair. She spun it around once, testing the weight, then settled in, interlocking her fingers on the desktop. It was a visual usurpation of power that made Daniel flinch. He was forced to take one of the two uncomfortable wooden chairs opposite the desk, the beggar's chairs, as Patricia used to call them when contractors came to ask for payments. Patricia sat in the other chair, her posture rigid, her face patchy with red blotches of indignation. Tiffany hovered by the door, unsure if she was allowed to sit or if she should run. Sebastian Wolf stood by the fireplace, leaning on his cane, a silent sentinel watching the execution. "Let's look at the numbers," Audrey said. She didn't have a folder. She didn't need one. She had an eidetic memory, a trait the Harringtons had dismissed as her being weirdly good at grocery lists. "Harrington Enterprises," she recited, looking at the ceiling. "Q1 losses were 12%. Q2, 25%. The failed merger with Oakhaven cost you $4 million in legal fees alone. Your stock price is currently trading at $12.50. If it drops below $10, you get delisted." Daniel swallowed hard, loosening his tie. "It's a temporary slump. The market is volatile." "The market is fine, Daniel," Audrey corrected him sharply. "You are volatile. You fired the CFO because he told you not to buy the company jet. You diverted R&D funds to renovate the summer house. You treat the company like a piggy bank." "That is none of your business," Patricia snapped her. "It became my business when I bought your promissory notes," Audrey said. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. She slid it across the desk. Daniel picked it up. His hands shook so badly the paper rattled. "What is this?" "That is a call regarding the loans," Audrey said. "The Phoenix Group bought your debt from the consortium of banks you borrowed from. The terms state that if the debt-to-equity ratio crosses a certain threshold, the lender can demand immediate repayment in full." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You owe me $150 million, Daniel, payable immediately." The room went dead silent. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly. Tick-tock, tick-tock. We don't have that kind of cash," Daniel whispered. "You know we don't." "I know," Audrey said calmly. "I know exactly what you have. You have about $3 million in liquid assets, most of which is tied up in this house. You have the yacht, which is already leveraged, and you have the company stock, which is plummeting." "You're doing this on purpose," Patricia hissed, leaning over the desk. "You vengeful little witch. You planned this. You seduced him, waited until we were vulnerable, and now you're trying to destroy us." Audrey laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Seduced him? Patricia, I was making lattes when he found me. I didn't plan this. You did. You created this enemy. I was content to be a wife. I was content to be a mother one day. You destroyed that. I am simply the consequence of your actions." She looked at Daniel. "I am offering you a lifeline, a way out." Daniel looked up, hope sparking in his eyes. "A buyout?" "A takeover," Audrey corrected. "Hostile." I can't let you take the company," Daniel said, his voice weak. "It's my grandfather's legacy." "Your grandfather was a brilliant man," Sebastian spoke up from the fireplace. "I knew him. He would be ashamed of what you've done to his empire. He would have fired you 5 years ago." "The terms are simple," Audrey said. "You sign over 60% of the voting shares to the Phoenix Group. I become the chairman of the board. You step down as CEO. I will appoint a new CEO, someone competent." "Step down?" Daniel looked horrified. "But what will I do?" "Whatever you want," Audrey shrugged. "Play golf, date Tiffany, post on Instagram. You'll keep a small stipend. Enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. The private jet goes, the yacht goes." And the house? Patricia asked, her voice shrill. What about the breakers? Audrey looked around the room. She looked at the books Daniel never read. She looked at the family portraits of people who would have hated her. The house stays with the family, Audrey said. Patricia let out a breath of relief. Well, thank God for small mercies. However, Audrey added, raising a finger, I'm taking the penthouse in Manhattan, and I want the master suite here available for my use whenever I am in town for business. You want to live with us? Daniel asked, confused. Oh, no, Audrey smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I don't want to live with you. I just want to make sure that every time you walk down the hall, every time you see me, you remember exactly what you threw away. I want to be the ghost that haunts this house, Daniel. Only I'm very much alive. I won't sign, Daniel said, trying to summon some bravado. I won't do it. We'll find another investor. There are no other investors, Daniel. Audrey slammed her hand on the desk, making everyone jump. I've blacklisted you. I called every firm in New York, London, and Hong Kong. No one will touch Harrington Enterprises because they know the Phoenix Group is circling. You are toxic. She stood up, towering over him in her heels. You have until 8 a.m. tomorrow morning to sign the papers, she said. If you don't, I call the loan. The company goes into bankruptcy, the assets are seized, this house is auctioned off, and you will be on the street. Real poverty, Daniel. Not the, I only have 1 million left, poverty. I mean, sleeping in a shelter, poverty. She picked up her clutch. Think about it carefully. I hear the homeless shelters in the city are quite full this time of year. She walked toward the door. Sebastian opened it for her. Wait! Tiffany cried out from the corner. Audrey paused. Tiffany walked forward, looking between Daniel and Audrey. She looked at Daniel, sweating, broken, and defeated. Then she looked at Audrey, powerful, radiant, and rich beyond measure. If he loses the money, Tiffany said, her voice shaking. Does he lose the credit cards too? Audrey smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, filled with amusement. Yes, Tiffany, the cards will be declined by noon tomorrow. Tiffany looked at Daniel. The calculation in her eyes was visible, like a math equation being written on a chalkboard. I think I need to go, Tiffany said. She started pulling the engagement ring off her finger. Tiff? Daniel looked at her, betrayed. What are you doing? I can't do poor, Daniel, she said, tossing the ring onto the desk. It landed with a heavy clink next to the divorce papers. Sorry, it was fun while it lasted. She ran out of the room. Audrey watched her go, then looked back at Daniel. He was staring at the ring, completely shattered. He had lost his wife, his company, his dignity, and now his mistress, all in the span of 30 minutes. See you in the morning, Daniel, Audrey said softly. She walked out of the library, Sebastian at her side, leaving Daniel alone in the dim light of his failing empire. The party died, not with a bang, but with a humiliating whimper. After the doors to the library had closed, the guests outside had lingered for a few awkward minutes, whispering behind manicured hands before fleeing like rats, sensing a sinking ship. Valets were screamed at to retrieve Bentleys and Porsches faster. Within 20 minutes, the driveway of the breakers was empty, save for the massive, silent black helicopter sitting on the helipad like a predator waiting to finish its meal. Inside the house, the silence was heavy, almost physical. It pressed against the walls, suffocating the inhabitants. Daniel sat in the library for hours. The ice in his untouched scotch had long since melted, diluting the amber liquid into a watery mess. He stared at the yellow diamond ring Tiffany had discarded on the desk. It sat next to the stack of legal documents Audrey had left, the death warrant of his autonomy. The door creaked open. Patricia entered. She looked older than Daniel had ever seen her. Her makeup was smudged beneath her eyes, and she had stripped off her uncomfortable heels, walking barefoot on the Persian rug. She held a glass of gin. No tonic. "She's in the blue room," Patricia said, her voice raspy. She had the audacity to ask the maid for chamomile tea, like she's a guest, like she didn't just eviscerate us. Daniel didn't look up. "She owns the debt, Mother. Technically, she's the landlord." "Don't say that," Patricia snapped, sinking into the leather armchair opposite him. "We can fight this. We can sue. Hostile takeover laws. There must be a loophole." "There are no loopholes," Daniel said, finally raising his head. His eyes were bloodshot. "I called Blackwood. He's already jumping ship. He told me to sign. He said fighting the Phoenix Group in court would drain whatever personal assets we have left within a month. He's terrified of Sebastian Wolf." Patricia took a long, trembling sip of gin. "I told you not to marry her. I told you she was trouble." Daniel laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "No, you didn't. You told me she was malleable. You told me she was safe. You liked her because she didn't fight back when you criticized her cooking or her clothes. You liked her because you thought she was weak." He picked up the ring, twirling it between his fingers. "We were both wrong," he whispered. "She wasn't weak. She was just patient." Upstairs in the guest wing, the atmosphere was different. The Blue Room was the finest guest suite in the house, with French doors opening onto a balcony overlooking the Atlantic. Audrey stood by the open doors, the salty night breeze blowing the silk curtains around her. She had changed out of her gala gown into a simple silk robe. Sebastian sat in a wingback chair by the fireplace, reading a leather-bound book he had pulled from the shelf. "You didn't eat dinner," Sebastian noted without looking up. "I'm not hungry," Audrey replied softly. She watched the waves crashing against the shore below. The sound used to soothe her when she lived here. Now, it just sounded lonely. "Are you having second thoughts?" Sebastian asked. He closed the book and looked at her with his sharp, knowing eyes. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it often leaves a bitter aftertaste. If you want to stop, we can stop. We can liquidate the debt, take the profit, and fly to Monaco tonight." Audrey turned from the balcony. Her face was pale in the moonlight. "It's not just about revenge, Uncle," she said. "It's about closure. For 2 years I let them erase me. I let Daniel erase who I was to fit into the box he built for me. I let Patricia make me feel small so she could feel big." She walked over to the fireplace and warmed her hands. "If I leave now, they win. They'll spin the story. They'll say I was a bitter ex-wife who tried to cause a scene and failed. I need to finish this. I need to take the one thing they value more than anything else." "The company?" Sebastian asked. "Their pride," Audrey corrected. "The company is just the vessel. I want them to wake up every morning knowing that the barista they mocked signs their checks." A soft knock came at the door. Audrey stiffened. Sebastian reached for his cane, his protective instinct flaring. "Come in," Audrey called out. The door opened slowly. It was Daniel. He looked wrecked. His tuxedo shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his tie gone. He looked like a boy who had lost his mother in a supermarket, not a CEO. I wanted to talk," Daniel said, his voice thick. He glanced nervously at Sebastian. "Alone?" Sebastian looked at Audrey. She gave a microscopic nod. "I'll be in the hall," Sebastian grunted, standing up. As he passed Daniel, he paused. "If you raise your voice, even by a decibel, I will have security escort you out of the window. Do we understand each other?" Daniel nodded, terrified. When the door closed, silence stretched between them. "The blue room," Daniel said, looking around awkwardly. "You used to like this room. You said it had the best view of the sunrise." "I did," Audrey said. She didn't offer him a seat. She stood with her arms crossed, a barrier of silk and resolve. "What do you want, Daniel? It's 2 a.m. "I wanted to ask." Daniel stepped closer, then stopped when he saw her flinch. "Why didn't you tell me? About who you were? About the money?" "Would it have mattered?" Audrey asked. "Of course," Daniel blurted out. "We wouldn't have had the financial stress. Mother wouldn't have been so hard on you if she knew you came from the Wolf family. Everything would have been different." Audrey smiled sadly. "That is exactly why I didn't tell you. You just proved my point, Daniel. You would have loved the money. You would have loved the connection to Sebastian. You wouldn't have loved me." "I did love you," Daniel insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "No, Daniel. You loved having a fan," Audrey said gently. "You loved having someone who looked at you like you were the sun. But the moment the clouds came, the moment business got hard, and I got tired and the spark faded, you went looking for a new fan. You found Tiffany." "Tiffany meant nothing," Daniel pleaded. "She was just a distraction." "And that's what makes it worse," Audrey said. "You threw away a marriage for a distraction." She walked to the door and opened it. "Go to sleep, Daniel. You have a big day tomorrow. I expect the pen to hit the paper at 8 a.m. sharp." Daniel stood there for a moment, looking at her. For the first time, he really saw her. Not as an accessory, not as a nuisance, but as a woman of immense power and grace. And the realization that he had held this woman in his arms and let her go crashed down on him with the weight of a physical blow. He turned and walked out, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Audrey closed the door and leaned her forehead against the cool wood. She closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. It was the last tear she would ever shed for Daniel Harrington. The morning of the surrender broke grey and dreary. A thick fog had rolled in off the ocean, obscuring the horizon and wrapping the breakers in a damp, ghostly haze. At 7:45 a.m., the dining room was set. Not for breakfast, but for business. The long mahogany table, usually laden with silver platters of eggs and fruit, was bare except for a pitcher of water, several crystal glasses, and the stack of documents. Mr. Blackwood had arrived, looking pale and sweating despite the air conditioning. He sat at the far end of the table, shuffling papers nervously. He wouldn't meet anyone's eye. Patricia sat on the right. She was dressed in a severe black suit, as if she were attending a funeral. Her hair was pulled back tight, her face a mask of stone. She was holding on to her dignity with a death grip. Daniel sat next to her. He looked hungover. His eyes were shadowed, his hands trembling slightly as he clasped them on the table. At 7:59 a.m., the double doors opened. Audrey entered, followed by Sebastian and 2 lawyers from the Phoenix Group. She wore a white power suit, crisp, tailored, and blindingly bright against the gloom of the room. It was a statement. She was the light. They were the shadows. "Good morning," Audrey said, her voice brisk and professional. She took the seat at the head of the table, Daniel's usual seat. Sebastian sat to her right. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Patricia spat. "Let's get this over with." "Agreed," Audrey said. She nodded to her lawyer, who slid the final draft of the agreement toward Daniel. "This is the transfer of control agreement," the lawyer stated. "It stipulates that Daniel Harrington transfers 60% of his Class A voting shares to the Phoenix Group. It also grants Audrey Harrington, soon to be Audrey Wolfe, full executive power over the board of directors. Daniel picked up the pen. It was a heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc. He had received it as a gift from his father when he took over the company. He hesitated. The nib of the pen hovered over the signature line. Is there really no other way?" Daniel asked, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at Audrey, a final, desperate plea in his eyes. "Audrey, please. This is my life." Audrey looked at him. Her expression didn't soften. "You made your choice 6 months ago, Daniel," she said evenly. "When you handed me a pen in that lawyer's office, you didn't ask if there was another way. You didn't ask if it was my life. You just checked your watch because you had a lunch reservation." She leaned forward. "Sign it, or I make the call to the bank." Patricia reached out and gripped Daniel's forearm. Her nails dug into his skin. "Don't beg, Daniel. It's pathetic. Just sign the damn thing so we can salvage what's left." Daniel closed his eyes. He took a deep breath, and then, with a shaky hand, he scrawled his signature. Daniel Harrington. He dropped the pen. It rolled across the table and fell onto the floor with a clatter. It was done. The Harrington dynasty, which had stood for 80 years, had effectively ended. Audrey's lawyer took the document, checked the signature, and nodded to Audrey. "It is valid." Audrey stood up. The shift in the room was palpable. She was no longer the ex-wife. She was the boss. "Thank you," she said. "Now, for my first order of business." She turned her gaze to Mr. Blackwood. The lawyer jumped in his seat. Ms. Wolfe, I assure you, I have facilitated the transfer smoothly. I look forward to working with the Phoenix Group to—" "You're fired," Audrey said. Mr. Blackwood blinked. "Excuse me?" "You are fired," Audrey repeated clearly. "You represented Daniel in our divorce. You knowingly hid assets and undervalued the estate to cheat me out of a fair settlement. That is a violation of ethics, and quite frankly, I don't like you. Pack your things. Security will escort you out." Mr. Blackwood sputtered, his face turning red. You can't." "I just did," Audrey said. She gestured to the door. "Now." One of Sebastian's bodyguards stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood gathered his briefcase and scurried out of the room like a frightened beetle. Patricia watched this with a look of horror. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that nobody was safe. "And now, regarding the management of the estate," Audrey said, turning her eyes to Patricia. "You said the house stays with the family," Patricia said quickly, her voice high and defensive. "It does," Audrey agreed. "However, the budget for the house is now under company review. I've looked at the household expenses. They are astronomical." She pulled a sheet of paper from her folder. $40,000 a month for fresh flowers, $10,000 for pool maintenance, $15,000 for a personal chef. Audrey shook her head. "That ends today." "What?" Patricia gasped. "But we have standards. We have appearances to maintain." "You have debt to pay off," Audrey corrected. "The floral budget is cut to 0. The pool you can clean yourselves. And as for the chef—" The door to the kitchen swung open. The head chef walked out, looking solemn. "I've already spoken to the staff," Audrey said. "Most of them are being let go with a generous severance package paid by me. However, I am keeping one person on the payroll." Maria, the housekeeper, stepped out from the kitchen. She looked terrified, twisting her apron in her hands. "Maria stays," Audrey said, "but not as a housekeeper." "Then as what?" Daniel asked, confused. "As the estate manager," Audrey said. "She will be in charge of the household budget. If you want to buy groceries, you ask Maria for the money. If you want to throw a party, you ask Maria for permission." She holds the credit card. Patricia's jaw dropped. You expect me to ask the maid for money? I have to beg my own servant for groceries? She's not a servant anymore, Patricia. She's your boss, Audrey said, a glint of steel in her eyes. She's a kind woman. Treat her with respect, and I'm sure she'll be generous. Treat her the way you treated me, and you might find yourselves eating ramen noodles. Audrey closed the folder. I have a board meeting in the city at noon. The helicopter is waiting. She turned to leave, Sebastian falling into step beside her. Audrey, Daniel called out. She paused at the door, her back to him. Is this it? He asked, his voice cracking. Are you just going to leave us here, like prisoners in our own house? Audrey turned her head. You're not prisoners, Daniel. You're free. You have the house. You have your mother. You have your name. She looked at him with a pity that was worse than hatred. You finally have exactly what you deserve. She walked out into the foggy morning, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor, the sound of a gavel striking over and over again. The walk to the helicopter felt like a victory lap, though Audrey walked it with the solemnity of a funeral procession. The fog was lifting slightly, revealing the grey, churning Atlantic Ocean, a mirror of the turmoil she was leaving behind. Daniel stood on the portico, watching her go. He wanted to run after her. He wanted to scream, to beg, to promise that he would change. But his feet felt leaden, rooted to the spot by the sheer weight of his humiliation. He realized now that the silence Audrey had maintained during their divorce wasn't submission. It was the calm before the storm. It was the silence of a chess player who sees checkmate 10 moves ahead. As the engines of the black helicopter began to whine, increasing in pitch until they screamed, the wind whipped Daniel's hair into his eyes. He saw Sebastian help Audrey up the steps. She paused at the top, her hand resting on the fuselage. She didn't wave. She didn't look back with longing. She simply put her sunglasses back on, shielding her eyes from him, and stepped inside. The door slid shut with a finality that echoed in Daniel's chest. As the aircraft lifted off, kicking up a spray of mist and dust, Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket. He needed a distraction. He needed validation. He tapped on Tiffany's Instagram profile, hoping for a sign that she was just angry, that she would come back. User not found. She had blocked him. He frantically searched for her handle on a burner account he used to spy on competitors. He found her profile. She had just posted a story 5 minutes ago. It was a video of her in the passenger seat of a red Ferrari, laughing, her hand resting on the arm of a man wearing a Rolex. The caption read, "Upgrades only, down on Mastet, new beginnings." Daniel dropped the phone. The screen cracked against the stone steps, another broken thing he couldn't afford to fix. He turned back toward the house. The grand, imposing mansion of the Breakers suddenly looked like a mausoleum. Through the open window of the kitchen, he could hear his mother's shrill voice. "What do you mean I can't order the truffles? Do you know who I am?" And then, the calm, steady voice of Maria. The former housekeeper turned estate manager. "I know who you are, Mrs. Harrington. But the budget is set. We are having chicken for dinner. If you want truffles, you will have to write a request to the board for approval. It takes 6 weeks. Daniel closed his eyes. The helicopter was just a speck in the distance now, carrying the woman who had loved him, the fortune he had squandered, and the future he had thrown away. He walked inside and closed the heavy door, locking himself in with the consequences of his own making. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't Audrey's silence. It was the silence of an empty life. And so the reign of the Harringtons crumbled, not with a war, but with a signature. They had mistaken Audrey's kindness for weakness and her silence for stupidity. They forgot the oldest rule of power: never burn a bridge you might need to cross later, and never underestimate the person who holds your secrets. Audrey didn't just survive her divorce, she transcended it. She showed the world that true power isn't about shouting the loudest or flashing the most money. It's about knowing your worth and having the patience to prove it. Daniel and Patricia were left in their gilded cage, surrounded by the ghosts of their greed, while Audrey flew toward a horizon that was finally, truly hers. It serves as a brutal reminder. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because they might just be the one waiting for you when you fall. Wow, what a roller coaster. I think it's safe to say Daniel got exactly what he deserved. But what about Patricia? Do you think living under Maria's budget is enough punishment? Or did she get off too easy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and ultimate revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. I have an even more shocking drama coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.